Hello. Welcome everybody on the internet to a new type of format or like a more express version of my classical media rant in my new review section. Well, I've been meaning to talk about this for a long time. I was kind of like debating on whether to do a longer episode or just to do a review, and I think it's not worth it to make a full episode because basically this series is just this one moment in time, which has been as weird as controversial as it is. Of course, I'm talking about the series finale of Euphoria, HBO's breakthrough teenage drama starring Zendaya, who I like a lot, by the way. I think she's an amazing actress, but she's a little bit typecast into this sort of charismatic, young, cheeky fellas. I don't know. Well, Euphoria finished its run with a final season that was greatly controversial, but it was controversial for such a set of strange reasons, mostly because of the topics it kind of like dwelled in a great part, but also about its format. So I have three things to say about Euphoria series finale. One is related to characters. I think that the lack of all characters or the different rhythms and development they have throughout the last season of Euphoria makes it the whole thing feel a little bit weak. I think part of what makes it so is that part, because before that Euphoria was this really big teenage sort of, is it teenage wasteland? I'm just thinking about the song, but just this teenage day-to-day spice of life with this really touch with this touch of darkness. You know, these suburban kids who end up meddling in, I don't know, drugs, discovering their sex lives, and getting so passionate about stuff in life. But what the original Euphoria before the end, I call it original because the final season is so different. What it made it so great was that it created, to me at least, this scenario of jaded, like lost youth in a way that before that I've only felt with, let's say, Trainspotting, one of my favorite movies of all time. So to me, Euphoria was this updated of teenage nihilism from, let's say, Trainspotting is from the 90s, so this is from the 2000s. So we got it updated to the what is that drug called? The fentanyl and that shit, right? The opioid. We updated to the opioid. We updated to social media. We updated to new canons. But in the end, it was the same. And the strength of that sort of argument is that they are direct criticisms of this fucked up capitalist society we live in. So Euphoria was really edgy, it was really strong. But they changed it into the final season, and sadly, it just makes it feel incomplete. The final season of Euphoria is mostly like 90% focused on Zendaya's character of Rue. But even Rue has a completely different story arc. We all expected Rue's story to continue attached to her family and to the strength of her relationships with the other characters. But here's where the second weird element comes into play for Euphoria final season, is the format. For some strange reason, creator Levinstein, for some reason, Euphoria's creator did this really weird thing of turning the final season of Euphoria into some sort of Tarantino tribute of an adventure crime story. Of course, basically focus on Rue and she becoming from a drug Is it called a donkey? Like someone who carries drugs around into a full-on stripper gangster. It's just crazy, but it's not necessarily relevant, and I think that is what makes that week as well. So we talk about the lack of characters and how not all of them being there sort of breaks the illusion that the original Euphoria had. And the format in this case, what it does is that basically it doesn't leave that much space for interpretation. If you are portraying a reality, let's say the teenage reality of suburban America, right? You can't really see that in a story that is focused on an adventure, quote unquote. The last season of Euphoria is this just one crime thriller story, which if you combine it with the first argument with the lack of characters, it makes it feel like all of the other characters are just there just because. They picked and chose which pieces they wanted to have, so they focused a lot on Zendaya and in Sydney Sweeney as like characters who are highly popular, but they're not really that related and they're not really that coherent among themselves. You could probably cut out all of the parts of Sydney Sweeney and bring everybody down a notch and just make all of this about Rue and make everybody else more than secondary character. Out of all the characters from Euphoria, not all of them appear, and not all of them appear in like in a relevant way. Even Hunter Schafer's character, like the co-star to me, of the original Euphoria, they are barely here. They are not really part of the story or the development. This is all about Rue and her Tarantino-esque adventure. With Tarantino-esque, I mean it's highly violent, it's extreme, it's aggressive, but it holds a degree of comedy to it. And I think that is something important to mention about Euphoria's final season, that is highly comedy coded, which is so strange coming from the previous Euphoria. It's not like the original didn't have any comedy in it, but was mostly above everything a drama. I think we can safely say the last season of Euphoria is basically a comedy, an action comedy. It's so ridiculous, it's so absurd, it's so out there. It's basically a comedy. So this is a highly strange scenario. So by the time you are halfway, almost through with the final season, I'm not gonna fully spoil it, but like some characters die, some characters go in different ways. You reach the final kind of like argument that I like to think about the last season is where should the story have gone? We had the characters, argument number one. We have the format, argument number two. Both of them make for a strange, sort of mediocre final season for a concept with such a drama and strength as Euphoria. It creates a halfway season, and like you kind of like are warm to it, and that's what I was. I was kind of warm to the final season of Euphoria. I wasn't totally satisfied with how not all of the characters were there or how they all developed, or I wasn't entirely like content with the format it took. I like Tarantino movies, but I think they make for more like talking bad about Tarantino, no? They make for a predictable setup and a predictable outcome. And Euphoria season 3 is highly predictable in that sense, in how it's like halfway through or even before that, you already know where this is going. But this is where the third argument comes into play. Where should have these characters gone? A lot of the talk about this last season of Euphoria was highly focused on Sydney Sweeney's characters becoming an OnlyFans model. I don't know how to define that. This is sort of, and the series itself plays a little bit on that, on the fact of whether it is sex work, on whether it is manipulative, in whether like women in it have control over it. But all of these arguments and all of this social commentary is half baked into the series. That is not important. As I said before, the important plot of the final season of Euphoria is Rue's final adventure. That's a cool name, Rue's final adventure. But here's the thing, the more you think about where this character could have gone, the more I start liking how they choose to end this. What do I mean by this? It's like we have had this time skip between the previous Euphoria, where they were mostly in school, into them being adults. And here's the thing: if we're basing our idea of Euphoria in this kind of like dark, nihilistic social commentary of suburban America, where else could have they gone? You know, I'm not saying they didn't deserve to have happy endings, or maybe they could have done better. And it was kind of like annoying and exhausting that every character in the final season was in not, let's not call it a dark place, maybe call it a gray place, but none of them were like classic happy whatever, right? They were all in these dire situations, owning money, deep into conflicts, crisis of identities, etc., etc. What this means basically is that original spirit of Euphoria is still there. You know, this nihilistic, miserable take on American society, this American 2000s version of Trainspotting is there. Even if it is exhausting that every character in the series, as I said, is not in a good point in life, like, what else could have they gone? Like, what else could this series have been about? Were we ready to have just more drama in the same sense of the original Euphoria? Perhaps we could have had that, but then it could just drawn out and keep going forever, and they could have kept living their miserable lives until they died, right? So I think what the showrunner just wanted to do was to close the book, and to that he created a story with an ending. Of course, the ending is tragic. Of course, everything is tragic. Of course, everything is miserable in Euphoria. You know? Recently, I finished another series, the Netflix series called Ozark. And that series ends in a similar vein, where every characters end up like in what you would call in gaming bad endings. It would be a bad ending. It would be a situation where like the main characters are either in let's say negative, and I mean, calling it negative is weird because it's a matter of perspective, right? But despite all of that, Euphoria's final season has moments of light, even if they are focused only on Rue, and even if they are not maybe the ones we wanted, like some kind of closure for her personal relationships, for her family, whatever the case. Even if that's not the case here, like, come on, where else could have this gone? The more I kind of like dove into that argument, this is a closing statement, this is an ending, and the more I liked it, you know. And I think that's where I'm kind of like leaning towards, and that is where my review is kind of like going in the end. You struggle to find all of the things that you expected, but basically this is just a creator creating an end, and I think this ending fulfills the promise of the original story, to have sort of like a dark, bad ending that's the only way this sort of misery can evolve. That is the only way this commentary can work. because the same as the original, this commentary, Euphoria's commentary is based on misery, is based on suffering, it's based on the enforced suffering that society has in the middle class in America. So in that sense, I think I liked it. I'm not gonna say it's the best, but the more I challenge this last question of how this series could have ended differently, the more I appreciate it. Because they could have forced a new cycle. They could have forced something that many series do nowadays, to have no ending. You can keep rolling forever. At least they gave the creator the chance of having an ending. And nowadays, that is a privilege. It totally is. So I understand why people were pissed about it. I understand mostly because of the first two arguments that I made. You didn't see your favorite character coming back. You didn't have the emotional closure that maybe you were expecting, because in the original Euphoria, it has so many beautiful moments of true human emotion between all of the drama and all of the crisis, right? There were moments of true human connection and emotion, which in this last season, there are mostly none. Because they are taken by the adventure, they are taken by the plot, they are taken over by this race to the ending, which is basically it is at the end. So as I said, this new format, this is shorter, more to the point. So in the end, Euphoria's final season, to me, it grew on me. I think it was a proper send-off for this series, even though it could have been better. And I think, honestly, above everything, it's well made. The performers are great. It's just one of those cases, as it happens so much. We don't call it television no more, right? As it happens nowadays in series, in live action, that I think people complain so much about endings. It's because not only the industry doesn't know how to end things now, but the audiences are not ever ready for endings anymore. We have been brainwashed and adapted by this new type of media. We expect an ending, but at the same time we expect a non-ending. We expect things to go on forever. So this is a very delicate balance that creators, writers, and showrunners need to think about. It's hard, it's hard to be creative in this day and age. It's hard to satisfy everyone. But seeing Euphoria as an kind of like author, independent view on a story, it's fine, man. Ultimately, I think people are gonna get pissed by everything. If we wanted, like, let's say, more commentary on modern sex workers, I don't like calling like OnlyFans models or anything sex workers. I think an appropriate term would be sexual workers, right? Because they don't really work through sex, but through sexual innuendos, settings, proposals, but that is not here or there for the sake of Euphoria. This was all just sprinkles of flavor to Rue's final send-off. And Rue is a great character, and we gotta say, this was probably the best ending she could have asked for. Deep down in misery. So shoutouts to shoutouts to Trainspotting. That's all I'm gonna say. And that's my review of Euphoria final season. See you all in the next one. It might be about something else. I'm gonna sprinkle some video games through the whole thing for sure. So keep watching, keep having fun, and having opinions. Please do. Bye bye.